You hang up that phone. Thanks.
All right. Hello, Mrs. Morhard. Thank you for joining us here at the Baseball Heritage Museum. Everyone watching, thank you for joining us. This is Mrs. Ruth Morhard, author of Mrs. Morhard and the Boys. Thank you for joining us this evening to speak about your book.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and especially delighted to be with the Baseball Heritage Museum, which is one of the gems of Cleveland.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you saying that. Your book was quite the fascinating read. Let me just throw it out right now that your book is available for purchase at MaxBacks, maxbacks.com, MaxBacks.com. Search for Ruth Morhard and Mrs. Morhard and the Boys. Everybody go out today and get your copy. It's you will not be disappointed. It's a fascinating read.
What I'm delighted to tell you that it's the launch of the paperback version that we're celebrating here today, and I want to tell you a little bit about the book. I'm going to introduce you to Junior, who is very prominent in the book, and I'll tell you a little bit about the book. I want to take you back to a date, September 28th, 1941. This was a date when one of our baseball superstars, he was 22 years old, his name was Ted Williams. He was with the Boston Red Sox. They were playing the Philadelphia Athletics, if anybody remembers the Philadelphia Athletics. And he was at bat. He crashed the ball into the right field speaker. And with that, he lifted his batting average to 406. And it's a record that still stands. Now, everybody remembers, well, I don't know if everybody remembers it, but people today remember Ted Williams's feat because, you know, he was the one who hit 400, and that's a pretty elusive mark. But interestingly, the newspapers didn't give it all that much attention, which I thought was kind of strange. But there was another game in another major league ballpark on that very same day. It was at League Park, and anybody who's been to the Baseball Heritage Museum knows League Park. It was the Little World Series. And the Little Indians were playing the Little Cardinals. The teams were, the newspapers all across the country were absolutely enchanted with these teams. And there was one of the teams had a player, a shortstop, who was batting 600. He could pitch right-handed or left-handed and do equally well with either. And he could field like, well, the old-timer Lou Boudreau, who Cleveland Indians fans will remember. The Little Indians actually won the game, and they beat the Little Cardinals. And it was just a phenomenal opportunity for the boys to be playing in League Park. Now, very few people today remember that game. They sure remember Ted Williams, but they don't remember that game, or that there was a woman in charge of the leagues. And I'd like to show you a little bit about her with a short video. It's on. This is Ricardo.
Yes.
Is the video over? No. Okay. It didn't, the video did not show on my screen. Did it show?
All right, we're back. We're back. Let's try this one more time.
There it is.
Okay, bear with us, everybody. Here we go. Let's try this one more time. It's well worth the watch.
No sound. There's no sound.
All right.
My mother was one of 17 children. However, 12 of them, only 12 of them lived to be adults. She left home when she was 12 years old.
Both of her husbands had one thing in common. They were both alcoholics and they were both womanizers. In regard to my father, when he was drinking, he would be brutal. I can remember him trying to choke my mother to death. I can remember him chasing my mother around the dining room table with a butcher knife. And I can remember him punching her in the face.
Larry Klasick at the time was a scout for the Cleveland Indians, and he was very instrumental in helping her get uniforms, which were replicas of the various teams in the major leagues.
Beautiful.
Well, sorry about the technical difficulties. We're all kind of new to this COVID-19 way of talking to people. But as you can see from the video, Mrs. Morhard had a very hard life. Now, it's very interesting because I only knew Mrs. Morhard. I met her only a few months before she passed away. I was with her son Al. We were cleaning out the house after she passed away, and I noticed a huge can of film. It said, "Bring up baseball" on the side. So I said to Al, I said, "Well, what's that all about?" And he said, "Oh, that's just a film about my mother. She started the Little League. The Cleveland Indians made that film about her." Well, you can imagine what I thought of that. I mean, I said to myself, sure, she did. But I was curious. So we rented a big 16 millimeter projector. We looked at the film, and I couldn't believe my eyes, because there she was with the boys on the field, sitting under the umbrella with the trusty whistle that she always had to keep the boys in line. And there was, there were some of there was Laddie Plasek, who was a head scout for the Indians, and he was showing the boys how to hit and pitch and field and catch. And narrating the whole thing was Pinky Hunter, who was an old-time announcer for the Cleveland Indians. So after seeing that, I was really intrigued. And so I looked into it more and more. And the more I looked into it, the more I discovered what an unbelievable woman Mrs. Morhard was. Her life was like a novel that nobody would believe. As you saw in the video, she left home when she was one of 17 children. And her father was a tenant farmer, and he worked her very, very hard on the farm. And eventually she got a little tired of the hard, she loved it initially, but she got a little tired of the hard work on the farm. And she was also taking care of the younger kids and doing just about everything. She did actually more work than anybody else on the farm. She got a little tired of it. So at 12 years old, she decided she was going to go and she was going to make her own way. And you can imagine what it's like for a 12-year-old girl trying to make her own way in the world back in the early 1900s. It wasn't easy. She faced just about every obstacle and problem you can imagine. Often she had little more to eat than peanuts and ginger snaps. She'd wear the same clothes day after day after day. She got jobs. The only jobs that she could get, she had no skills. The only jobs that she could get were taking care of kids and doing housework. So probably out of desperation, eventually she married a man named Jerry Giroux. And Jerry Giroux was an absolutely brilliant man who had a tendency to go wherever there was money to be made. You'd see him in the coal fields of West Virginia, and then he was out in Los Angeles in the oil fields. And the next thing he was doing, he was down in South Florida. He was managing a hotel in South Florida that was owned by Cleveland investors. Well, he came back to Cleveland and she met him, and very soon they were married. What she didn't realize was that he had a wife in just about every town he'd been in. And actually, he's the kind of guy you could actually write a book about him when you look at his story. But ultimately, he was a drinker. He drank and he abused her, and she didn't want to get divorced because divorce wasn't something that you did in those days. But ultimately, he abandoned her and she divorced him. And then she met a man, he was an immigrant from Germany. His name was Albert Morhard, who owned 3 meat markets in Cleveland. And with Giroux, she had a daughter, Geraldine. With Mr. Morhard, she had a son, Albert. Well, Mr. Morhard also had a drinking problem. He was kind of a womanizer as well. And definitely there was some abuse there. Well, she divorced him actually twice. She married and divorced him twice. And she had a son and a daughter, and she wanted them to have a better life. Well, this was in the middle of the Great Depression. And you can imagine what times were like. She was not only an emotional wreck, but she was she got one of the meat markets in the divorce, and she was struggling to keep the meat market going. She was also concerned about her son, Albert, who was called Junior at the time. He'd seen, as you saw in the video, he had seen his father do some pretty unspeakable things to his mother. And he was acting out. At one point, he took a BB gun and shot through the leaded glass windows of a neighbor's house. And his mother, as you can well imagine, was pretty upset. She wanted to find some way. She had to work long hours at the meat market. She wanted to find some way to help him so that he'd grow up and have a better life and be a better young man. Well, one day she's looking out the living room window, and she sees him in the street, and he's got a tennis ball and he's got a stick, and he's hitting the tennis ball with a stick, and he's got a Cleveland Indians cap on his head. And all of a sudden the light bulb goes off, and she says, maybe baseball is the answer. So she went up to the mayor and she said to the mayor, do you know of any teams that my son could join? Well, he didn't know of any, but he said that that Junior and his friends could use the field in back of the University Heights town hall, which they did. And they'd have a few games there, but the land was sloping, the weeds were high, the balls would run into the street, and there was not enough room for an outfield. So she decided she wanted them to have a good field. So she and Junior were out one day. They went to get some dinner, and they went to a place called Lenny's Chicken in the Basket, which was near a small shopping center that was being developed. Well, next to the shopping center, she saw this huge field, and she said to herself, boy, that would make a great baseball field. So she got the kids together, and they tried to clean the field, but there was just too much work. So she went back to City Hall, said to the mayor, she said, this would be a great thing for the city of University Heights, for all these boys who have nothing to do. And I think you should help me. So guess what? He helped her. Next thing you knew, the city trucks were there. They were grading the field. They made an infield. They had a beautiful field for the boys. So the boys started playing there. Well, the more they played, the more boys started playing. And eventually her team they wanted to be called the Little Indians because, of course, they all loved the Cleveland Indians. So she's searching for other teams to play. And, there were a few. There was a CYO team. There was there were just a couple of kind of ragtag teams. The boys in some of them were just wearing shorts and a shirt. So she was playing them, but she got a little frustrated because they wouldn't show up half the time. Well, to make a long story short, she started a junior American league. And she not only had the Little Indians, but she had the Little Yankees, the Little White Sox, and so on. And she went down to the neighborhood sporting goods store, and she met Laddie Plasek, who was a scout for the Indians. And he was also a representative for Wilson Sporting Goods. So she said, I want my boys to have authentic Cleveland Indians uniforms. So he got them for her, and she paid cost. They were exactly the same as the regular Cleveland Indians uniforms, except for one thing. The Indians uniforms had an Indian on the sleeve, and the boys' arms were too small, so it went on the back. So she's got a junior American league, and she's got people now. The newspapers think this is wonderful. They just love, the idea of the teams that are replicas of major league teams. So she got more and more people more and more boys wanting to join, and they were coming from all over. They're coming from as far as Parma. They're coming from all over the area. So eventually she started a junior national league. And again, the little Cardinals, the little Pirates, you name it. At the time, as you can imagine, baseball was definitely the national pastime. Radio had really brought it to the forefront, and everybody loved baseball. And the idea of seeing these boys playing on these beautiful fields, I mean, there was nothing like them at the time. just really enchanted everybody in the area, and the newspapers were giving it lots of publicity. And the Indians got very involved. Junior's hero was Bob Feller, and Bob Feller and Jeff Heath and Roy Weatherly would come over and they'd play ball with the kids. Mel Harder would stop by the games, and I think Mel Harder is one of the unsung, the great heroes of Indians teams. He'd invite the kids, he'd go watch the games, and he'd invite the kids over for popcorn and soda, and he'd regale them with stories about the Indians. And he always told them, he said, play to win, but have fun doing it, and always remember to be a good sport. And that was really Mrs. Morhard's whole idea behind starting the teams. She wanted the kids to grow up right, and she felt that baseball had a lot of lessons to teach: the discipline, the teamwork, and much more. And she was quite a lady. She made sure, I mean, she encouraged them. She encouraged all the boys, and they all treated her like a second mother. But she had a whistle, and you're the first to see her whistle. She had a whistle that she would blow, and the boys knew if they heard that whistle, they better behave themselves. There was one boy who used to do somersaults across the outfield, and they were arguing with the umpires, and so she didn't want any of that. And she brought in professional umpires and paid them $50 a game, which was a fair amount of money back then. And
that's a lot of money.
Yeah, one of her umpires was Hal Lebovitz, and I'm sure most people remember Hal Lebovitz. He was a longtime editor of the Plain Dealer. He also had a column in the Sporting News, and he's been elected to the Writers' Wing of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Well, he was one of the umpires, but he was just as much a coach as he was an umpire. After the games, he'd bring all the boys together, and he'd sit and talk to them, and he'd say, okay, what do you boys think you could have done better? And they'd tell him, and he said they were usually right. So he was a great champion of her leagues.
So Ruth, let me ask you this. Where was Mrs. Morhard's baseball or love of baseball and her baseball knowledge stemmed from? Where did she pick up her knowledge?
Or she had loved baseball all her life. But you think about the 1930s, radio had just come into play, and the games were being broadcast on radio, and you didn't have to go down to the ballpark. You could listen, and she and Junior would listen in the car, or they'd listen on their big Philco radio at home. And, they just became entranced with it. And, and she basically, she managed the Little Indians, and she ran the leagues, but she had a lot of help. I mean, she had Laddie Plasek was a great help to her. Alva Bradley was the owner of the Indians at the time, and they provided baseballs, and they provided scouts to teach clinics for the boys. Alva Bradley would invite the boys to have dinner with the players. And Roger Peckinpah, who was the manager at the time, his son was also on a team. He was very involved. Well, I'll tell you about that later, but the Indians just helped in many, many ways. And she had managers. One of the managers, for example, of the Little Yankees was a guy named Bill Lindquist, and he had been a minor league player. And he was grooming his son Ray to be a minor league player, and Ray actually did make it to the minor leagues. But she actually had a one woman who managed a team. And she and this was Mrs. Anderson, and her son, it was Dr. Jack Anderson, who was also on one of the teams. When they weren't in the baseball field, they were going around to the local bars and checking to see if where their wayward husbands were. But anyway.
I just want to take 1 second, acknowledge some of our viewers. If anybody has any questions, feel free to write them in the comment box, and I'll make sure Mrs. Morhard gets them, and we can go ahead and try to answer them for you. But want to say hi to Tim Ray, Looking forward to see you Saturday too. Chris Maria Salzer, hello. Ben, Susie, nice to see you all join us tonight. Happy to have you.
Well, if we go back to September 28th, 1941, the Little World Series, you know, obviously when she had a junior American League and a junior National League, what's the next step? A Little World Series. So the champions of each league played each other, and actually the runners-up played each other in the game before at League Park. That was on September 28th, 1941, as I mentioned, and just think about what happened a couple of months later.
Sure.
Is World War II, Pearl Harbor. So it became more and more difficult for her to run the teams. She started in 1937. She actually had a better year in 1942. She added teams and they had another Little World Series. But at this point, fathers were starting to be drafted, mothers were going to work, gas was being rationed, and it was hard to get the kids to the games. So by 1944, she disbanded the teams. Now, what's interesting is that the film the Cleveland Indians made about her went to a lot of different cities who were interested in having teams. And one of the places it went was to Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And she got a call from Carl Stotz, who was the founder of the Little League. He had started Little League teams in 1939. And he wanted to hear all about her teams, and he wanted to see the film. So she sent it to him, and we don't have any idea whether or not her teams had an influence on him, but we do know that he was well aware of the teams and has seen the film. The film, by the way, is on YouTube for anyone who's interested in seeing it, and it's very early 1940s. But it's really interesting to see, and it's interesting to see the boys who were really, you know, pretty proficient ball players at that time.
Great. This sounds great. Maybe we'll have a viewing party one day and watch that movie and have you comment and just tell us what's going on in the film. That'd be fun.
Well, I also want to say that 30 years after the ball teams were founded, the boys had a reunion for her. And Hal Lebovitz was there, Roger Peckinpah was there, the umpires, a lot of the boys from her teams. And they thought so much of her that they had a reunion. They presented her with a baseball pin. And I'm going to show you they all signed a baseball. And if you look closely, you might see Hal Lebovitz's name on there. The names are getting kind of worn, and there's another Roger Peckinpah's on the other side, but you can see that a lot of the boys wrote on the baseball. They really considered her a second mother. She encouraged them so much, but they also knew that they couldn't get away with anything. Before a game, she would she wanted them to tell her about a good deed they'd done the day before. So all of these little kids are running down to the neighborhood grocery stores and helping little old ladies with their packages. And I'm sure the town didn't know what had gone on with their formerly mischievous boys.
Ruth, Amy Lynn wants to know what the name of the movie on YouTube is again. She missed it.
It's called Bringing Up Baseball.
And we'll share a link for that on our Facebook page after the broadcast, Amy.
And you can't just plug in Bring Up Baseball and it should come right up.
Great. We have Steve Praiano from Boston. He joined a few minutes late, but he caught the tail end of your Ted Williams reference, and I'm sure he'll want to go back in the beginning and rewind and hear that story again.
Well, I hate to say this because I am now a Cleveland Indians fan since I live in Cleveland, but I grew up a humongous Red Sox fan. when other girls were playing with dolls, I had memorized all the batting averages and all the earned run averages in the major leagues, and all I read was about baseball. And as I said, the Red Sox were my team, and where we lived in Connecticut, one half of the state was Red Sox and the other half was Yankees, and never the twain shall meet. I mean, the Yankees were just really hated at the time by the Red Sox fans and vice versa.
Yeah, it's surprising how long those rivalries actually last.
Wouldn't it be nice to have that rivalry on right now?
It'd be fascinating, and just to have any sort of baseball rivalry going on right now. Let's hope that these, like Steve Praiano said, let's hope these players cared as much as they did back then.
Right.
Get something going, and so we can see some baseball.
I want to introduce you to Junior.
Oh,
Can you see him? Because I can't see.
Hi.
This is Junior, who was kind of a mischievous young boy, but he certainly turned out okay.
no BB guns for you, right, Junior?
What'd you say?
No more BB guns for you?
No.
No more BB. I haven't seen one for a long time.
But he played, a lot of people ask, did any of the kids go on to the major leagues? And no, they didn't, but that wasn't what she was all about. But a couple of them did go to the minor leagues. As I mentioned, Lindquist was with the Yankee organization. And I'm sure you all, if you're from Cleveland, you know Heinen's grocery stores. They're in the Cleveland area, they're the Chicago area. Well, Jack Heinen was a friendly competitor of Mrs. Morhard's in the meat business. He had a grocery store. It wasn't that far from where her meat market was. And one of the boys on the Little Indians was his son, Jack Heinen. And Jack Heinen was a phenomenal pitcher. And he became a phenomenal pitcher at Stanford, where he went to college. He was pitching 100 miles an hour at the time, which was pretty unbelievable. The Red Sox signed him. Here we go with the Red Sox again. The Red Sox signed him, and he was playing with a Red Sox team out in California. He was drafted. He was playing baseball in the service. He was playing with people like Willie Mays. Went back to the Red Sox after the service, and the Red Sox invited him to spring training, and there was every indication that he was going to make the team, because he'd been pitching no hitters and he had this tremendous earned run average. Well, he called his father all excited, and his father said, "When are you gonna stop playing a little boy's game and come back and help me run the market?" And guess what he did? He went back to help his father run the market. So that was the end of his career. But of course, ball players weren't making a lot of money back then, and it seemed like a better thing to do at the time, I guess.
Yeah, fascinating. Steve Praiano says he's been to Cleveland for an Indians game. Next time he's going to come out and check out the museum, which we would love to have you, Steve. And Steve wants Junior to know that he shouldn't have any BB guns because you'll shoot your eye out, kid.
I lost my BB gun.
You either lost it or Mrs. Moore or your mom took it away.
I haven't seen my BB gun for a long time.
All right. Well, Mrs. Morhard, it's been fascinating. Great having you. It's been a great conversation. I hope everybody goes out to maxbacks.com and buys the newly released paperback edition of Mrs. Morhard and the Boys. Are you able to get a signed copy?
Yeah, the copies at Maxbacks are all signed copies.
And that would be a great Father's Day gift. Father's Day is coming up. it would probably be a great read, a great gift for sure. Somebody asked how we can buy the book. You can go ahead and go to maxbacks.com.
Yeah, look for Mrs. Morhard and the Boys. Now, it's also available on, Barnes and Noble and Amazon and bookshop.org, but you won't get the signed books. So.
Oh, okay, that's great to know. So, yeah, I guess Google it, and all your options will be presented to you. And if you want that premium signed copy from Ruth Hanford Morhard, make sure you go to maxbacks.com and search for Mrs. Morhard and the Boys.
Thank you all.
Thank you, and hope to see some of you at the Baseball Heritage Museum this summer, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., with that first hour reserved for those visitors that would be considered at a bit higher risk and want a little more social distancing. So go ahead and put that in your planner and hope to see you out there. And again, maxbacks.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Mrs. Morhard and the Boys. Get your copy today. Hope to have you back. Maybe we'll have a viewing party for that movie. That'd be great. Great fun.
That'd be fun.
Thanks a lot. Have
Okay.
a great evening.
You
Thanks everybody for watching.